Well, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you all for being here. I want to say that I just had a productive meeting with Governor Reeves and Mayor Lumumba, Congressman Benny Thompson, and virtually joining us was Senator Hyde-Smith and Senator Roger Wicker. And we had a very good conversation about the urgency of staying close and working in a coordinated fashion for the people of Jackson. You know, our concern is obviously the immediacy and ensuring that we respond to this emergency in a way that assures the people of Jackson that they will have access to good quality drinking water. But we also talked about midterm solutions as well. And we're putting together a construct by which state, federal, and local entities can come together and access the resources that we believe are available to the people of Jackson. The state of Mississippi will receive more than $26 million in SRF funds in 2022, and that's on top of $30 million that's available in 2021 loan funds for Jackson. And that is also in addition to $13 million that is currently in an existing capacity as well. So we believe that there are even more resources that we can access, but we do know that it will require all of us working together to cut through the bureaucracy, have open lines of communication, and access these resources so that we can put them to work immediately so that we can have some longer-term solutions for the people of Jackson. So thank you all for joining, and now I'll turn it over to Governor Reeves.
Thank you. Well, thank you all for being here today. I appreciate the administrator coming to Jackson, Mississippi today. He had conversations with those in the community, toured and visited the O.B. Curtis plant, and then we had a very productive meeting here, and thanks to the great president of Jackson State University for hosting this meeting today as well. We had a very large delegation, both from our federal partners, not only the administration, but also from the Congress, both Congressman Thompson and Congressman Guest, as well as our two United States senators participated. They are voting on the floor, but they were able to participate through Zoom. We appreciate that. And really the conversation that we had was largely focused on both the intermediate and long term. You've heard me say repeatedly since last Monday night that we have a short-term, short-run emergency that must be dealt with. Initially, that was dealing with the quantity of water coming out of the facility in addition to the quality of water. At least as of an hour ago, we had addressed the quantity of water issue, which is certainly very positive. We're working now, continue to work with the Department of Health and the city and other federal partners to address the quality of the water so as to hopefully get that boil water notice lifted sooner rather than later. We've said that the fixes at the plant were certainly, at least over the last 10 days, could be defined in the thousands of dollars or tens of thousands of dollars, but we know that here in the city, as well as in virtually every jurisdiction across America, there is aging infrastructure that has to be dealt with, and much of the conversation today was about unleashing and unlocking monies that are available through the traditional funding sources as well as through other sources as well. So a good, productive conversation with the administrator, with the mayor, with the members of the federal delegation, and I appreciate Administrator Regan for being here on the ground in Jackson, Mississippi to have those conversations. So thank you, and I'll turn it over to the mayor.
Good afternoon. I will reiterate what has already been said, that I do believe that our discussion was fruitful. One of the things that was most important to me was the component of us continuing to lean in together, making certain that we have some frequency of discussion to make certain that everything is flowing as it should and that we can see the ultimate improvements to O.B. Curtis and, more importantly, just the water distribution system of Jackson being sustainable, being reliable, and important to me, being equitable across the city. I want to thank not only Administrator Regan and the governor, but also, as has been stated, Congressman Thompson, Congressman Guest, Senator Wicker, Senator Cindy Hyde Smith. I want to thank them all. Anytime you have that level of engagement, present, and leaning in to Jackson's challenges, then that is a good sign. And so we have to remain there. I also want to thank the people who have been on the ground for the last few days. Not only those individuals who work for the city and the water treatment facility who are more delighted at what they're seeing and more encouraged, their morale is up, but we want to thank the people from FEMA who have been on the ground, and the EPA. We want to thank the people from the Rural Water Association. Governor made mention that some of the repairs were in the thousands. One of the ways that that was able to be captured, which is different from the normal contractual way, is because the Rural Water Association mutual aid agreement was able to accomplish many of those repairs that we would have otherwise had to contract out. And so there has to be some reassessment of our SRF loans that we've put out and how they have to be prioritized because of those repairs. And so I'm just grateful for the team and everybody working hard and diligently. Thank you.
Questions?
Yeah, Mr. Regan, could you address this? The EPA obviously has been critical of the city of Jackson for its way it's handled sewer and water issues. Is there some duality here in trying to find some common cause when the EPA has criticized Jackson for how the sewer system has not been fixed and now the water crisis it currently has?
You know, Jackson, like many cities across the country, has had a fragile water system. It's our job to ensure that every person in this country has access to clean drinking water. So some of these structural issues actually existed prior to. I don't think that's a secret. I think when we look at this flooding situation, and I think as we look at increasing evidence of climate change and intense storms, we're going to see even more stresses on these fragile water systems. So we do have to walk and chew gum at the same time. We have to be able to look at the repairs that need to take place on a normal basis, but we also have to begin to make investments to ensure that not only we build functioning water systems, but that they are more resilient to the types of storms that we're seeing as we move forward.
There's something I wanted to ask about the presence of a plan. We hear the concept of a plan brought up a lot. Lieutenant Governor Hoseman, Governor Reeves, Congressman Benny Thompson have criticized the city's lack of a plan. Now, in the past, some of us have highlighted the engineering plan, for example, from 2013. And I'd actually love to get input from all of you on when the plan is brought up. Is that an engineering plan? Is that a funding plan? Is it a legislative action plan? What does the city of Jackson need, and where is it at today?
Well, so let me respond from my vantage point, and then I'll let the gentleman respond from theirs. When I think about a plan, I think about what's required to unlock federal dollars. And so if we want to have access to the state revolving loan fund resources, the $13 million that currently exists, the $30 million that currently exists, being competitive for the bipartisan infrastructure dollars that will exist, well, we need to see a plan in place that demonstrates how those resources will be spent and what they will be spent on. And it's really important that we talk about this because the state of Mississippi alone over the next 5 years will receive $400 million from the bipartisan infrastructure law, $72 million in this fiscal year. We want cities like Jackson to be competitive for those resources. As a matter of fact, the way the law is designed, over half of the resources that are allocated to disadvantaged communities or communities that have similar characteristics of Jackson. So we do need to have applications in place from cities like Jackson to make them competitive for these historic investments that we have at our fingertips.
Part and parcel of our conversation was talking about the opening of the portal to receive some of these federal funds, and when it opens up in October. We made a commitment. Part of the commitment that the city of Jackson made is that we're going to apply for these funds. And so that will require engineered assessments, which we have. Yes, the city has had engineered assessments. Yes, the city not only has had engineered assessments, a lot of what we've relied on is the expertise and the review of the EPA, which I would imagine has also had experts at the table reviewing what they saw as the critical needs. And so to speak to that, I think I spoke extensively about that and what we have shared. But we also come to the table humbly, and I want to be clear on this. Anything that the city of Jackson is submitting that is insufficient to meet its need. What we are expressing is our critical need and our desire for the support. And so we're willing to make adjustments where necessary. One of the things we talked about, like for instance, with the outstanding SRF loans, and these are loans that the city has applied for some of this money and has been granted because we followed that process. However, like for instance, when we have had professionals at the water treatment facility fixing many of these long-standing challenges, we now have to make amendments in terms of what our priorities were at that time versus what our priorities will be going forward. And we're inviting not only the plans that we have, we're inviting people who will be, point persons, if you will, that have water engineering expertise to help us going forward.
What I would just simply say is clearly there's needs to be ongoing conversations with respect to planning both in the intermediate and the long term. But I want to be very, very clear that from my perspective, and certainly the perspective of many EPA reports over the last 5 or 6 years, the single most important planning piece to this is a plan whereby there is a situation in place where when we can be assured that the management, not only of the treatment facility plants, but also the management of the water system as a whole is managed in such a way that it works the way it's supposed to. For instance, we have to make sure that we have a billing system in place, that everyone who receives water receives a bill. We have to make sure that the rates associated with the water that they receive and the wastewater that they receive are rates either actuarially done or otherwise that make sense to fund the system. Within that funding structure and the rate structure, we have to make sure that we have adequate dollars in there so as to fund routine maintenance on a regular basis. Obviously, those are areas that have been a challenge in the immediate past across the board, having enough operators at O.B. Curtis, for instance, having enough ensuring that everyone who receives water receives a bill and that everyone who receives a bill pays the bill. Those are some short-term planning issues that as we move beyond the immediate phase, and I'm hopeful that we will move beyond the immediate phase and be able to say sooner rather than later, I don't want to give a time frame, but again, in days, not weeks or months, where we have clean water being delivered to all of the residents in the city of Jackson. Those are the conversations that are going to be ongoing, hopefully between the city, the state, the federal government as well. And obviously at that phase there's going to be a lot of other opinions that also that enter into the equation as part of that's going to be potentially legislative as well. And so I know that there's been various players here that are talking today as well as that are not here that have had conversation with some of those legislative leaders also, and so they'll certainly have opinions on that also.
Governor Reeves, how much is the state prepared to spend to help Jackson upgrade its water system?
Well, what I would tell you is the state has spent about $200 million in the city over the last 5 or 6 years. The federal government is obviously making funds available as well. The administrator mentioned that there's about $400 million available through the infrastructure plan. $400 million is a lot, but the total population of the city of Jackson is 5% of the state of Mississippi. So if we utilize, this is not the way it works, but if it worked such that that $400 million was allocated across the 1,100 water systems equally based upon population, then the city's allocation would be approximately $20 million. I think we all know that the intermediate and long-term plans are going to be far greater than that. And so I think as we get the short-run problems fixed, I think you'll see a greater willingness to invest even more resources beyond the approximately $200 million that the state's put in through various programs over the years.
I know you're doing, we talked about Wednesday starting an investigation, water tests on the system before you can do water quality and perhaps signal. And then I don't know which one of you guys can answer the question. Do we start that today? Are we looking at possibility by Friday, having hope this water advisory is over?
We are doing investigative testing on the water, but just to be clear, and I'm certainly not an expert, but this is what the experts have told me, if you're producing perfectly clean water out of the facility, it typically takes about 3 days to get the entire system flushed out with the water that was already in the system, and that's with everything working perfectly. So I don't think Friday is a realistic goal, but I do think as you get into the weekend and into early next week, we will have a better idea of the samples and what the quality looks like. I don't think there's any doubt. I think there's general broad agreement that the water being produced today is cleaner than it has been in a long, long time. Certainly the pressures are better today than they've been in a long, long time. But again, the actual call on is the water clean enough to not have a boil water notice is typically and will continue to be made by the State Department of Health because they are the regulator. They'll do the sampling, and it'll be 120 samples, have to be completely clean over a 2-day period. 2 different 120 sample processes will have to occur. I think Friday is extremely optimistic, but I think as we move forward, we're certainly, I think I would describe the investigative sampling as positive, but we know it's not where it needs to be.
One of the things you mentioned was that you can apply for loans. Are there any grants available for the city of Jackson? I don't know who would answer that one.
Yeah, I will just say that the obvious answer to that question is the American Rescue Plan dollars that came in. The city got a little over $40 million. The county got a little over $40 million, and the mayor, of course, doesn't speak to what the county chooses to do with their funds. He's made that very clear, and I think correctly so. But the city has gotten about 40, and the county's gotten a little more than 40. The state legislature set up $750 million for cities, counties, and rural water associations, and it's a dollar-for-dollar match. And so, and those are grants. And so, whatever funding that the city council and the mayor decide to allocate that. Now, initially it is a competitive grant program, but I think it's fair to say, I certainly believe it's fair to say that over the last week or so, the conversations with the city, I think certainly our administration wants to work with the city and make sure that we prioritize whatever funding that they have that they can match dollar for dollar, that we prioritize that on these projects that are being worked on at the plant and throughout to get the best bang for the buck, if you will, in those monies.
Governor, you said on Monday, we recognize the need for both an intermediate and long-term plan. I personally believe that we cannot rely on the city of Jackson to provide that. Do you still believe you cannot rely on the city of Jackson to provide
Well, look, I think that the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers has a planning team at O.B. Curtis right now. The FEMA, when the FEMA administrator was here last Friday, we had a long conversation that they have planning teams in place in which they are working on intermediate and long-term plans for the city. Certainly the State Department of Health and the EPA have issued reports and other things over the last number of years that I think are certainly indicative of where we need to go in the intermediate and the long term. And so what I would tell you is I am hopeful that intermediate and long-term planning is a collaborative effort between the city, the federal government, and the state as to what that needs to look like. Now, again, typically water systems, obviously, in our state and I think around the country are run by their boards or their municipalities, and the state on the water side through the State Department of Health and the EPA are the regulator, not the planner. But certainly, so I'm not saying we're on territory that's never been on before, but it's certainly a little bit different. But there's the important thing is thus far there's been a common commitment by all parties to work together in a collaborative way to get the fix in the short term, to get clean drinking water as fast as possible, but also to work together to collaborate in the long term to develop a plan that includes all things from operations all the way to capital investments to make a difference.
So just to be clear, your statement that you cannot rely on the city to provide that plan is a statement that the city cannot do it alone. It's not a statement that the city won't be involved.
I think my answer speaks for itself.
I just want to follow up about the state revolving loan funds. You brought up in the past, Mayor, that the difficulty with making use of those loan Are there systems in place that make some of those loans forgivable? Are they more palatable now than they were when we talked in the past?
There is a process that allows it to be forgivable, and we hope to get as much of that forgiven as possible. And, you know, in terms of, you know, the last question and how it connects to your question, in order for this to happen foreseeably from the city's vantage point, it is going to require a little more than just a loan program. It's going to require, because affordability becomes an issue. You know, the city's debt structure becomes an issue for that. And so we will look to be a part of that competitive process. I want to be clear that with the ARPA program that allows that match to take place, that the portal only opened up the first of this month, right? We're in what, I'm forgetting the days, but I think this is the 7th or so. And, you know, we've even talked about the federal government and its loan program that is anticipated to open October. So we will do so. To your earlier question, we will do so with the precision of an engineer's description.
Do you have a timeline, if you had to ballpark this, now that there's so many resources, federal and state, Marshall to help the city, when the water system could be a reliable, sustainable water system? Is it possible?
I couldn't say that to you with any precision or anything other than just a, you know, out of the blue guess that isn't based on any expertise. What I do know is that in order for us to repair everything that's at that water treatment facility or pivot to a new water treatment facility, depending on what is assessed to be the best route, and I think some experts spoke to us earlier today, or at least spoke to my administration about that's part of the evaluation that is ongoing. You not only have the challenges out there in terms of aged infrastructure. To be honest, some of the plant's layout just isn't practical. It isn't functional. Some of the feeds that go into certain parts of the plant are a long distance from the area in which it's feeding, right? So the technician who may think that they have fed some chemicals, the actual moment that they believe that it has happened actually doesn't happen for some time until it travels through the system to get there. That's one example of the lack of functionality there. And so I think that, you know, to the governor's point, we do have more experts on the floor now, right, than would be typical for any city, to be honest, that can better advise us as to what is the best plan of execution going forward.
For the mayor or the governor, as far as progress that's been made so far, how much of it has been made on improvements that are temporary versus improvements that can be long-term solutions?
That's a question I asked earlier when we were in the briefing from the EPA and FEMA and MEMA earlier today. And they said they were going to try to create a dashboard for me. I don't know that I can answer that in this moment, but they are reviewing that, and that is something that we hope to present to you later on.